Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another Black History Month webinar entitled Black Voices of Past and Present in STEM. Let's go ahead and get everyone settled and logged in just for a little bit, and then we'll get started. And we do want to let everyone know that this webinar will be recorded and posted onto our YouTube channel. And before we get started, I'll be giving a brief intro about the National Research Mentoring Network, NRMN, and I'll also introduce you to our panelists today. All right, so founded in 2014, NRMN is an NIH grant-funded initiative whose entire purpose is to diversify the STEM workforce. We do this by providing researchers across all career stages in the biomedical, behavioral, clinical, and social sciences field with evidence-based mentorship and professional development programming that emphasizes the benefits and challenges of diversity, inclusivity, and culture. Our program achieves that through mentorship, networking, and professional development through our online networking platform, MyNRMN, which currently has over 21,000 mentors and mentees. We encourage everyone to visit our website, nrmnet.net, to learn more about our resources. NRMN is thrilled to have our panelists join us for today's webinar. Joining us, we have Dr. AJ Hinton from Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, Dr. Haysetta Shuler from Winston-Salem State University, Dr. Jamaine Davis from Meharry Medical College, Dr. Vernat Exil from St. Louis University, and Dr. Elsie Spencer from Teachers College, Columbia University. NRMN is delighted to provide this opportunity for everyone to participate in this webinar and have your questions directly answered by our panelists. We'll be offering a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so we encourage you to type any questions you may have in the Q&A feature down below, or you can also use the chat box that's down below as well. And from NRMN, we want to give a special thank you to our panelists for making this webinar happen. And now I will pass it over to them to begin the webinar.
Hi, thank you all so much for joining the call. And also Dr. X will be here. He's still seeing patients. So he'll be here maybe in about 5 to 10 minutes. So the first thing I would like to actually talk about is just the concept of what Black history means to each of you all. But I'll call on each of y'all one at a time so that we don't have to talk over each other. So I'll start with Dr. Spencer. Could you tell us about what Black History Month means to you?
Sure. Black History Month means a lot of things to me, but it's more of a remembrance of who we are as a people, what we've contributed to our society as unsung heroes, and the work that we still need to push forward, especially in fields such as STEM, and how that relates to us as professionals, as people. That's pretty much in a nutshell what Black History Month means to me.
Excellent. And then Dr. Schuler.
Yes, I'm in agreement with Dr. Spencer. It is a month of observance, which I think should be throughout the entire year. We are observing one African American and those other brown people what contributions they have made to society as a whole, and how those contributions, how we're using some of their science to better our society as a whole, because we have little knowledge in our history books in the classroom, inside the American culture classroom. So with Black History Month, it gets a chance to change that narrative and bring students up to date to what Black scientists have contributed to society and continues to contribute to society in spite of the challenges that we face because of the color of our skin.
And Dr. Felicia Jenkins, I see that you made it. Thanks for actually coming on. We really wanted to have another perspective, an interesting perspective from the area of actually diversity, equity, inclusion. And the reason I brought her on was because each individual has their expertise, and we didn't have someone as an expert for the diversity, equity, inclusion. So could you introduce yourself really quickly and then also provide a perspective of what Black History Month means to you?
Oh, absolutely. So my name is Dr. Felicia Jenkins. I am the DEI Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program Manager for Basic Sciences at Vanderbilt. I've been here for about 6 months. And what Black History Month means to me is so many different things. I think of it as an opportunity for me to delve a little bit more into my history as an American and an African American at that. And I also think it is a wonderful opportunity to remind all Americans, natural born or naturalized, that Black history is American history. And I think that's forgotten so many different times. So I use it as a reminder on a daily basis to say, and this is everyone's history who resides in this country.
And thank you so very much for that. And Dr. Davis, could you tell us about what Black History Month means to you?
Yeah, I share the same sentiments that my colleagues already presented. And one thing I would like to add is that it's an appreciation and an opportunity to share what we haven't gotten in our elementary schools and has been hidden from us for so long. And it's an opportunity to grow individually and collectively as a society. So it's really a great opportunity to acknowledge the contributions that just even extended outside America that we've done in the world, because we don't often see that, so we don't often appreciate that.
Excellent. And Dr. Exil, I'll catch you on the next round. I know you're probably just settling in. Thank you for coming. And then I'm gonna ask another question, and then we'll get around to introducing you and getting your thoughts about what Black History Month means to you as well. Okay, so the question that I actually wanted to propose to some of the individuals on the panel, because I know there's different types of research, but I wanted to focus on everyone's kind of research so that everyone kind of knows that we all are investigators in our particular area of interest, and that Black history means that it's not only a celebration of Black excellence, but what does that mean in the space that you're in on an everyday basis? And so I would like to start with, I'm gonna go in reverse this time. So Dr. Schuler, she's left to me on the screen. So Dr. Schuler, could you tell us about your research area of interest, and also any other endeavors that you've dived into, more recently about that may have changed your perspective on where you're going with your research?
Okay, sure. Of course, my research is in psychology. So I enjoy studying human behavior. And one of the things that drove me to this area was because of some of the health disparities and the job disparities and the education disparities within our country. And I understood that there were factors that were outlined in the literature about so many social issues. And I often wondered, where are they getting this information from? And then when I read the data to see how many people that look like me were part of the subject, I'm going, how are they inferring this information or on this topic about my people? So in order to find out that information, I went to school and I wanted to get my PhD. So I could conduct my study to make sure, or repeat studies that have been done previously, to make sure this information is correct. And guess what? Found a lot of faults. Was I biased? Of course not. So in order to change the literature and to increase or reduce that gap in the literature, I had to do research. And I love it. I love it to see how we take little known facts about a group of people and we make an inference on it, saying that this population, that population, this population. And guess what? It also drives policy decisions and all of that throughout society and our structures. So I wanted to get into a place and love being in the place of being at that table where decisions are made about our people. And I employ every student who is out there. If you want to make change, you have to get at the table of decision making. You have to get at that table where policies are made. You can march all day, you can sing all day, you can celebrate all day, but until the structure change, there's no real change.
This was really good. And there's one more psychologist on the phone, so I would like to go to Dr. Felicia Jenkins. Could you talk to us about your research as well?
Absolutely. So yes, I am a psychologist as well. And Dr. Schuler, I just love your enthusiasm and excitement. I share it. My background is community psychology, which is a little known area of psychology. And what our goals are as researchers is to actually go into the communities and ask the communities, what do you want to see? What do you want to change? And how can we help you reach your goals? So my research is in the area of overall women in STEM, but more specifically, Black people, Black women in STEM. And so it's been difficult research to do because we are quite underrepresented in these areas, but it's also been very informative because we know that the research that we do that helps those who are struggling the most, and when I say struggle, I mean because of the situation that they're in. So they're struggling because of the communities in which they exist and at institutions, especially predominantly white institutions. And so we know that the programs that help those people the most, in this instance, Black women, that those can also be used to help everyone else. And so it's a real issue of, giving something to the least of these, well, not really the least, but giving something to them is really going to help us all. And so that's what my research has been focusing on, just making sure that anyone who wants to be a scientist can be a scientist and that they're not limited because of other people's perceptions of who they are.
Excellent. And Dr. Exel, I think that we've given you time to settle in, I believe. So Dr. Exel, could you introduce yourself? Could you tell us what Black History Month means to you? And then also tell us about your research, if you don't mind.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
You can hear me. Let me turn on the camera.
Yes, sir.
I was trying to see if I could I'm on mute. Oh.
No, you're not on mute, Dr. Exel. You're
Okay.
Well.
I'm kind of a limited technology. Hi, everybody. Well, Dr. Hinton, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. And I apologize to everybody because I was late because I was seeing was it clinic, and the other thing is that I may not be able to stay for long.
That's okay.
Because I have a meeting coming up. But well, this month is special for the simple fact we have to think about maybe how thankful we should be because we are standing on the shoulders of giants, those who have for the last 100, 200 years have done incredible things with so little opportunities to open opportunities for people like us, those of us who are here enjoying this time. By no means we have not arrived. There's a lot more to do. I hear we shouldn't celebrate, but at the same time, maybe there are very small victories we should celebrate or think about because I think the future, maybe will open more opportunities than for others compared to what has been available to us or even for two people 10, 20 years ago. I think that's the way I see it. One of the things that I do research in cell biology, looking at things inside the cell that has to do with that help the cells make energy, make the heart pump. But every day when I do this, I think about what I would call, many of my friends would call the bottleneck in our system, how we can help the kindergartner today arrive and do better than I could ever dream of doing myself. So we have some real issues we have to think about. We have to think about the schools. How can we go back and help kids at all levels? For some reason, my kids actually, I should say, they have taken this approach in saying, well, how can we give back? And each one of them has decided, believe it or not, to go back to the school system to try to help the younger kids, because apparently, which is true, the data, if the kids cannot learn how to read or write or get enough support at home by the time they get to 4th grade, it's totally different path for them compared with what those of us who are around the table today can talk about. And in a lot of ways, it's no longer about ourselves. Although, yes, many of you are very young, you want it to be a little bit about yourself, but it's all about those kids who are being born today, kids who are in kindergarten and 1st grade, how we can be part of making the change or helping them so that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they'll be in a different place. That's what these are my thoughts. So when I think about this month and I think about everything on television about this month, I have a lot to be thankful for. At the same time, I have a lot to reflect on. And the big question is how we're going to open the doors and facilitate, give opportunities for those who are actually behind us. People have done it for us 20, 25, 50 years ago, marching in the streets and doing a lot of things. I can start saying names, but what are we doing to help others as well? This is what I have to say, and I will stop.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for giving us the perspective. Wisdom is something that we all need to hear at times. And one thing that I wanted to talk about while everyone's on the call before Dr. Exil leaves is talk about the diversity of the Black diaspora, because we're all very unique. And a lot of us may just appear to be, one identity, we're Black, but actually Black is multifaceted and encompassing of a lot of different things. And I know that Dr. Spencer and Dr. Exel don't mind me sharing, but they're also Afro-Latino. And one thing that you'll see is that they look different. They have different cultures. They're from different places. And we all are. And then I'll let Dr. Davis also talk about his roots as well. And so I'll pass around and talk directly to each one and ask you to kind of talk about that and how that actually gives you a different lens for how you see the world. Because I think sometimes Black people are thought of as a monolith, and they think the Black culture is what you see in the mainstream, but we're all very different, And so that's something I want to touch on while Dr. Exel's here, so we can also hear his thoughts and wisdom before he has to get on to saving other people's lives. And so, Dr. Spencer, could you start? Could you tell everybody how you identify and how that lens you use to be able to do your research, and talk about your research as well, and then just how you see life as a Black person?
Sure. So as Dr. Hinton mentioned, I am Afro-Latina. So I hail from Cuban roots, and my father is Colombian. So I self-identify as being Black, but my ethnicity is Latina. So to me, what that means is I identify with being Black, of course, but I come from an ethnicity that doesn't speak English, that speaks Spanish. And that, I think, lends a very interesting perspective with how I view my life and my career, because it all leads down to resiliency. So my parents came here for different reasons, but the main reason was to have a better life for themselves and for my sisters and I. And that resiliency, having to beat back racism and prejudice, and then on top of that, having to learn another language, and then being a professional and at their countries, and then coming here and having to start out like my mom. She started out cleaning the bathrooms at Columbia University and working in housekeeping. And I saw how my mom really struggled to put my sisters and I through college. And here I am, years later, I have a terminal degree from an Ivy League institution. I have my master's degree from Columbia. And all of this is because of the struggles that my parents, my family went through to get us into a better place than where they were. And I remember, you know, I was at my doctoral dissertation defense, and I wanted my mom to be there. I wanted my mom to actually sit at the table next to my chair, next to my second, and actually see what goes into being a doctor, being having a terminal degree in this country, having all of the hard work that she put into the sacrifices that she made come to fruition at that point. And so that was sort of my trajectory to where I'm at now. And right now, I can definitely say my calling or my research focuses on DEI issues, especially within STEM, and particularly the challenges that are faced by students at all levels, including, postdocs and early career faculty. And some of these challenges, they can include things such as imposter syndrome, leaks in the STEM pipeline, effective mentoring or lack thereof for BIPOCs and underrepresented minorities, and the lack of support or supportive environments that's direly needed to thrive in these STEM fields. So I think my research goal, part of that is to extend my goals to create a major diversity center, but at an elite institution that pushes the message forward and provides a blueprint to help senior leadership navigate the DEI diaspora at our institutions of higher learning and becoming effective allies for BIPOCs and underrepresented minorities, but in all institutional ranks, ranging from students and faculty and administration.
You're muted.
I would like to thank you, Dr. Spencer. And I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Davis because I also know that he has to attend the thesis committee soon. So I just want to make sure that he gets in his perspective and his unique heritage where he comes from. Could you talk about it, please?
Yeah, so it's not that much different. I think it's interesting to see, I think when you have a different lens and you're able to see other parts of the world and other communities, you grow and you expand and you appreciate. And so I've been fortunate enough to be in situations and environments with a lot of diversity. But I've also been fortunate to be with limited diversity. And I've learned how to navigate through both, right? And so I think a lot of what we go through is code switching is what they call it. And I think that that's an important kind of skill to have because, you know, you see yourself, I think one of the kind of the biggest things that I learned is that people see me differently than I see myself, right? And so we go around thinking that, oh, you know, you see me as I see myself, but people don't always do that. And they always kind of try to label you. But I've tried not to do that because I've been exposed to so many different people through the Caribbean and my family, and then being able to travel. And so I've learned to appreciate that we are different. And that doesn't mean that we're even more or less. I had a difficult time understanding lived experiences of people who are biracial because I didn't realize the complexity of it. So they had, you know, it's almost like society forces you to choose. And so, you know, as I present, I think that it's, you know, I don't have to necessarily go through that, but I realized that that's a major concept of struggle that's unnecessary. But we do see that we need to find these communities and support to uplift them. And I've learned through my research, so I was brought into research kind of maybe unconventionally because I knew I wanted to do research, but didn't have the opportunities until someone told me the impact I can make as a role model. Because we don't have a lot of African-American males, for someone to see me in that position can have a big impact. And I am extremely blessed that I've witnessed that. I've been in situations where people who look like me and identify like me have been inspired by me and vice versa. And so lastly, I'll just talk about my research because I've been trained as a biochemist, biophysicist, which is why I have this photo here, because, you know, I wanted to understand how proteins function. But as I started to learn more, I started to realize that, you know, these genetic variants that we hear impact the structures and function of proteins that lead to different downstream effects like human diseases. So I've started my research program to understand how mechanisms, disease mechanisms manifest in, particularly in communities of color. So Black women have comparable incidence rates of breast cancer, but the highest mortality. So I wanted to understand some of those the underlying causes, like what are the specific details that happen? So I became more now of a person in health disparities. And so I appreciate that the more diversity I have, the more I appreciate, but it keeps me involved in a lot of different things. So I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy meeting the people such as yourself and the people on this panel in this environment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. And Dr. Davis, they're talking about the picture. Could you actually tell them about where that comes from? Some of them may not know about like what has happened and exploded around social media for spaces for Black professors, grad students, and postdocs.
Yes, I'm happy to. So in the year of George Floyd, you know, the sequence of events that happened, we realized that there are many Black professors in different fields. So there are multiple other events that contributed to this, but we never knew who each other were. So with this amazing technology of being accessible and visible in virtual space, a lot of communities, scientific communities, created these Black in X, so Black in a specific discipline. So I'm one of the founding members of the Black in Biophysics. And so biophysics is basically looking at physical interactions of molecules within the cell. And so one of the postdocs in my lab created this image. So this image, when you think about a gene, we know our genes give us the traits like hair color and being able to digest certain things. But each gene is translated into a protein. And these proteins are what kind of give us the hair color, eye color, and so forth. And so the picture here is basically like alpha helices, which is part of a protein structure on top of someone's head representing hair or dreads. So I thought it was a really clever way to advocate the field of biophysics. And so you can find it on Twitter and on social media as well.
Thank you so very much. And although Dr. Exil's not on the call, he's one of my mentors. So I'm going to just tell you briefly about him. I won't tell his story because that's something you can reach out for. But he is from Panama and he's Afro-Latino. And, you know, the conversations that we've had are absolutely incredible. He has an MD and an MBA, and he's been through a lot, and you can tell he's more seasoned than the rest of us. And so it's really nice to get his perspective. But one thing that he tells me is that, you know, excellence is how you carry yourself. And he carries himself well for multiple communities, whether it's the Latino community, whether it's being Black, or even when he's speaking French to other people. And so it's absolutely incredible. And Dr. Davis, thank you also for your time as well. And so good luck with the thesis defense. So as we continue this conversation, you know, we have maybe about 15 more minutes maybe before we open it up to questions for the audience. I wanted to kind of switch gears and talk a little bit about representation and what that kind of means. So these are about 3 or 4 questions that I want to propose. And I hope that, you know, you'll be open to the dialogue. So one thing is I want to actually ask each of you about what diversity, equity, inclusion means to you and how the institution itself could actually improve to be able to be more, I guess, an all-inclusive space like Dr. Davis was talking about. And then the second thing is, where do you see DEI going over the next, 4 to 5 years? Let's see. Who should I start with? Dr. Schuler?
He's having a ball, you guys.
I am.
That he is. Okay, for me, diversity, equity, and inclusion is all encompassed in one word, of humanity. Although there are three words, they all point back to one middle sector called we are all humans first. I have a saying that we are perfect, imperfect human beings. And what does that mean, Dr. Schuler? It means that as we discuss, as Elsie and Dr. Davis discuss their ethnicity and how they identify, that doesn't change that they are human beings, number one. So why is it that we could only, with even this month, why did we only have 1 month that we as a nation celebrate Black history? Why is that? Because we only have 1 month where we recognize that there's diversity in science, there's diversity in STEM, whether that diversity represents in gender, race, ethnicity, or whether in your socioeconomic status. 1 month. And the contributions that we've made deserves more than that 1 month of celebration on a national level. So what is it to me? It means, again, remembering that we're all human, remembering that we all have something to contribute to society in all structures of society. And we need to make sure that there is a format or a structure that first identify that racism does exist and be willing to listen to opportunities for change and to eliminate the racism. There has to be equity across the board where there's funding available for all Black scientists and STEMs. How do you do that, Dr. Schuler? You got to get to that table of decision making. You have to get to that table where policies are made, and the policies must be designed in such a way that it addresses the true issue. How do you get that addressed? We start with our leaders. We have to continue to show them that racism, inequities exist in education, in banking, in housing, in healthcare, and learn how to bring this to them and show them what this change will look like. And then we can truly say that we are diversified. We're an inclusion company. We believe in equity. It's not just about a day of celebration of Latinos, Chinese, or whoever. That's just a celebration. Let's call it what it is. It's a celebration. It's not a change. Diversity. It's not about putting another female on the board or another male on the board or bringing in a white person or a Black person or a Latino person. That's called you adding somebody to your board. We got to call things what they are. You know, there was a member of the Trump administration that used to use alternative facts. I believe that has hit America in so many ways that you have not understand what truth is. That's just my personal belief. And I'm going to be quiet because I can go on and on and on this subject. But that's what it means to me. It means that you're human first, and we want to be treated just like a human being and nothing else that God made on this earth, but being a human. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. You, the comments in the chat say you're speaking. You preach. So for some more preaching today, we're going to go to the other two panelists. So Dr. Spencer, will you go next and tell us your thoughts? And then we'll wrap up with Dr. Jenkins and we'll go to another question that's of the same level.
Sure. So I echo everything that Dr. Schuler mentioned, and I applaud her for just speaking truth and providing wisdom. I agree. Diversity, equity, inclusion, it's what I am. And I don't see a lot of how I look and what my experiences have been out in my career and in my profession. I see a lack of it. And the only place that I do see that DEI thrives are in our judicial systems. And I feel that that is something that is just, our society is so imbalanced. So we don't see a lot of equity in terms of Black people, underrepresented minorities, and things that give back to our communities. But we see them in things that, you know, our jail systems, where we have people in there that are serving very long prison sentences. And then when they are, you know, eventually let out, it's almost like slavery again, where they're not able to vote They're not able to get good housing, jobs, things like that. So we really haven't moved forward in our society because of those things. You know, when I turn on the TV, when I go to a meeting, I often find that I'm the one or maybe, you know, another person of color. And understanding that that's just something that has happened and just saying to myself, well, I can't really change that. That's just how it is. That's how it's always been. And that self-defeating sort of thought process is, you know, part and parcel of the problem, that we sort of accept that there is a problem with DEI. It's always been there. We're powerless to change that or to improve that or to make that more equitable, but we're not. And I feel that, especially being in this country, education is that way out. Education will lead you to those positions of power that will dictate the laws and the policies that our society is based on. And we don't have many of us in those positions. And I feel that is definitely something that is within our control, something that cannot and should not continue to be denied to us.
Amen to that. Dr. Jenkins, do you want to go? And then I'm actually going to go too on this one because
I mean, you can't pass me up on this one. I didn't know we were having church today, but I'll join in. So I agree with both of the doctors before me. And one thing I'd like to add is, in the beginning, when I thought about DEI, I would say that it's more than just race, you know, because it includes so many different things. It can include hidden disabilities. It can include other people of the global majority, because people of color are not the minority. We're the global majority, but we're underrepresented and some intentionally disenfranchised in so many different ways. It wasn't just happenstance. So when I think about DEI, I think about all of those other things, the hidden disabilities, the visible disabilities, and also racism, because if you are experiencing one of those other types of DEI issues, if you layer race on top of it, it's going to change the whole situation for you. You're going to experience it differently as a person of color, as a person of the global majority, than you would if you were white, and you're going to experience it especially differently if you are Black. And I also agree in calling the thing as it is. And so I love the term BIPOC because it's very inclusive. But if we're talking about the racism that affects Black people specifically and most egregiously, then that's what we need to say. We could say people of color and especially Black people, because it definitely changes how things happen specifically in our country. So I agree with what both of you all said. I'm going to agree with what Dr. Hinton is about to say, because I've already met him and I know him a little bit, and then I'm just gonna rest my case at this moment.
So one thing that I would like to bring up as a very young faculty is that a lot of faculty don't kind of understand the duality of actually being a person of color in general, but specifically Black. You know, with me being able to be a leader or a new leader really in DEI, because there's many of leaders that were before me that have embraced me and they're helping me, you know, in this space. And one thing is that I don't think faculty realize that without doing DEI or having a place that you can call kind of a stake in the game of your own, you don't feel welcomed. You don't feel embraced. And actually allowing somebody to be able to do that allows an individual to feel embraced. So a lot of the conversations when faculty are talking to young faculty, whether it's here at Vanderbilt, whether it's at Harvard, whether it's at Yale, Stanford, or Winston-Salem State, for example, we all have to be inclusive in how we're talking about things and how science looks at that individual. A lot of individuals really focus on, well, you need these things for tenure, but remember that everyone's journey is different. They can have that over that course of that time period, and you have to let people kind of grow into those spaces. And so a lot of times, you know, I suggest for the people that are on the phone, you know, when you're at your particular institution, encourage the conversation about how do you see your future? Instead of always kind of mentoring down, sometimes it's need to be mentoring up, where the individual that's the younger is doing reverse mentoring to tell you what they're expecting and actually develop a plan of action that's going to help someone embrace. And this can be also used not only at the faculty level, but also at the postdoc level. You know, little action behind this. It's raining here today. And this also can be used at the undergraduate level as well. And so we have to realize that it is not always about how this blueprint is set up. This is how a lot of times Black individuals leave science, because there's not this authenticity around individuality. We're so focused on checking a box with Black people where it's like, okay, we have our diverse candidate, but where's the next diverse candidate, you know, that may look exactly like them to make them feel, you know, helpful. You know, it's so important to be able to be open to that. And then we also have to be humble and be willing to receive advice in a different way, because everyone has something to offer and everyone is unique and has their experience. And so I think that's something that we have to learn how to really embrace. And I really hope that, you know, from this conversation, remember, it only takes one person in that room to make a statement that is a changing statement. You know, from this, you know, one person can affect another person. And remember that being an individual from a different background does not exempt you from the conversation. It actually allows for you to embrace the global majority that will be in 2050. And this is how we be a collective. We don't have to be divided. We have to just be united. There's enough space for everything. You know, I'm a Christian. God says, you know, your gift will make room for you. You know, and so that's something that, you know, you have to think about. We all have uniqueness, and that's the reason for it. A gift is unique, and not two gifts are the same. They may be similar, but each person operates in that gift differently. And so we all have to realize that's the same thing with science. We all operate, we all think differently, we do things in a different way. And sometimes you have to sit back and enjoy the show. Now, there are cases where, you know, you may want to rescue the young, you know, individual that, you know, that might be a young investigator or a trainee, but let them go, let them enjoy, you know, and I think that's very important for people to realize. And you can be excellent at multiple things, and no formula is the same. There's different blueprints for every situation. So it's something I just wanted to say, because it's very important that everybody understands that. And then Dr. Davis, since you're back, we just want to ask you a question about where the future of DEI is going and how institutions can embrace Black scientists as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And it all depends, it all has to come from the top. I think that many of us, ingrained in many of us, is the natural kind of aptitude to diversify and to create opportunities for people, sorry. And I think that we all see that there are a ton of quality applicants and people out there. But the higher up we go everywhere, the less diverse it is. So in order to really make it equitable, we're going to need to use the same approach in those spaces. Some places have already adapted that, and they've seen some changes and some improvements. But unfortunately, most have not. So the future of DEI is going to be developing the right talent, developing the talent, and then providing spaces and opportunities for those people to go. Because we have this amazing pool of people, but that glass ceiling or that gatekeeper kind of mentality is preventing people from really expanding globally. So the future of DEI is to really make it diverse on every level.
I agree.
And if I could also add, I think a lot of it too is based on changing policies. I mean, a lot of these institutions, professional institutions, they need to be accredited by accrediting agencies. And a lot of these policies that they adhere to do discuss, the very bare minimum that institutions need to admit in terms of diverse and minority students. And I think the AAMC, one of the accrediting agencies for medical schools, it's something like 6 or 7% of the incoming student body needs to be diverse. And so my thing is, like, what calculations are they using for such a low number? It's part of that process of, here you have society creating these sort of equations like they did back in the day where, you know, depending on how much Black blood you had, that determined how much of a human you were. It's sort of the same thing with, you know, these institutions. Well, we're going to admit 6.5% because the bare minimum is 6. And no, let's strive to do better. Let's be more intentional about it. And it's not just about being accredited and, you know, leveling the playing field. It's like, how do we bring different perspectives and different lenses to the table? Because that's how we learn the best, right? From different perspectives. That's what we as institutions, as institutional leaders, swear that we are, that we have our mission statements to help guide us through that. But if we don't change these policies, DEI are just going to be conversations and not something that will be intentional and will be represented in numbers.
I agree.
Just to-
Go ahead. No, yeah, go ahead. It doesn't
I-
matter.
You hit on a nerve, right? We all can.
I think inclusion is going to bring about more collaboration between us. When I say us, I mean African American, Browns, Latinos, everyone who doesn't look white or is identified as white. And it's going to bring us closer together, collaborating more, and it's discovering that we can do more when are we all going to agree? No, we're going to agree to disagree. The main goal is to keep diversity alive, keep the fight going to change those policies, as Elsie has said, because if you ask anyone who started with the Constitution of the United States of America, how did you come up with that 1/5 or 3/5 or 2/5 of a man? What part of the body did you leave out? Because I too am Christian. And as Paul said, the hand cannot say, I don't need your fingers. The ears cannot say, I don't need your eyes. The eyes cannot say, I don't need feet. So what part of us did you decide to leave out and give us 1/5? Where did you get that calculation from? Ever since that calculation has been ingrained into those constitutions, they've made math difficult for African American children ever since, and they cannot explain the answer. So what do? I believe DEI is a chance and an opportunity afforded to us to come together, to put down our differences and come together and make our very own. When we come together and strive for the best, just like we used to have the Black Wall Street, that is gone, but it can come back. We used to have our own other banking system and education systems. They wanted to separate, but now they're running to our HBCUs. Oh, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on there? So I think we can bring together a plan, some strategies, some brilliant minds, and come out with a beautiful DEI product or products.
David, you can go, and then I'm gonna go, and then we need to talk about HBCU since it got brought up, and I think it's something that is a highlight and pinnacle for reason why there's Black excellence today.
The only thing I was going to add to Dr. Spencer was she said institutions, maybe NIH needs to be accountable in the funding mechanisms, right? So we see all this diversity and the importance, but you know, people are still getting $1 million grants, multiple $1 million grants, and not contributing to society diversity, the broader impact, basically.
So, you know, I'm just gonna be honest, you know. So another thing is individuals, you have to also be willing to put out your DEI. And what that means is being accountable for what you're doing for your metrics. Report your metrics. There are journals that allow for you to report yearly metrics at an institution. And so we have to be accountable for how we quantify diversity, equity, and inclusion. There'll be a paper that comes out, I think in about less than a month, that Dr. Marcus Lambert and I did on how to quantify diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics at an institution. So stay tuned. Of course, we'll have other, you know, webinars throughout the year, and we can talk about that more in detail. But it's critical because a lot of times we don't expose really what it means to be diverse. And we have to be aware that we can no longer go by the current census to be able to establish what is diverse. And we have to kind of get out of this habit of trying to curtail people into like, you know, a quadrant. You kind of say like, okay, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. You know, you can't do that. You have to really understand that people are multifaceted identities and that we have to learn how to embrace people's identities as they are. That's the first point. The second thing is that you all have to read diversity, equity, inclusion. So just don't do it and think that just because you're in a position to do that, you know what you're doing. Actually go to the community. If you're in a position of power, whether you are in a dean's office or you're in a position that allows for you to be a vice chancellor or vice president of diversity, equity, inclusion, or you work close to a department of that, go to the community. And what that means is spend time with the people, let's say at the Black Cultural Center, spend time with people at the Hispanic or Latino, you know, center. And then the same thing for, you know, Indigenous and Native Americans as well. And so if you get there and you learn and you go back and then you go back again and you go back again, that's community. Community is not doing these check marks where you're like, we had Black history and we did this little panel, we doing it, you know, and spirit fingers, you know, from the back in the day from the Bring It On movie, right? And so if you can imagine from that actual, you know, group, you know, they copied everybody. If you remember, they copied this small, you know, group that actually wasn't getting the credit. So a lot of times DEI is what you see online and then you blueprint it and you have this recipe that goes around and it's not authentic. And this is why your faculty of color, this is why your students of color don't feel that you are present and in the moment. You can have all these diversity, equity, inclusion things, but if it's not intentional and it's not building community, it's gonna drive individuals farther and farther apart. When certain things are done for other individuals on time, but not on individuals for you, for example, like a person of color, that creates distance. That creates like, okay, well, they're not going to operate on my behalf. Let me just close in and just do what I need to do. Another point is that do not be afraid to say you don't know. That is where we actually focus and learn and be able to have a real conversation. Conversation is where you have to be open for change. And if you don't know, it's okay. And then sometimes you'll be surprised, you know, the person that you think knows that might be a person of color may not know. So, you know, you have to kind of go to the sources where you know that you can provide that guidance. I'm gonna, you know, I sound like a broken record, but I love some of the Black women that are out there that are killing the game. An example of that would be Angela Byers-Winston, Veranda Montgomery. They specialize in mentoring as a science. Another person is Ebony McGee. She's out here changing how we think about STEM education. You know, so these are examples where you could actually start and read. And, you know, there are other individuals that are out there like the community of scholars. There's a collective that operate and do different activities, you know, work together for different articles to actually create narratives to open the doors for other individuals to be able to have access. And then understanding and going to some of these Twitter spaces. There's a guy that's on Twitter. His name's Arnaldo. Who's the diversity dean at UT Southwestern, and he creates all of these spaces where you can actually go and learn. And he's Latino, but it doesn't matter. You can still learn how community really works in a group, and then take that information back and try to apply it somewhere else. And just have an open conversation. Say, you know, I really don't know, but I learned this today. You know, what does that really mean? And when you have a real dialogue, people are open to teaching you. When you're sincere, people of color can see that. And especially Black people can see it because there's so much turmoil that happens every day. And the thing that we actually need to transition into is HBCUs really quickly as we close. And I also just want to bring up the context that a lot of individuals are afraid sometimes to be aware that Black individuals, they have it 2 or 3 times, you know, they've already had a hard day before they actually get into the day, where they may have been discriminated against before they even get into the door of the workplace. So be aware and be sensitive to that. And then, you know, don't always bombard them with everything, you know, every request. Sometimes let them pick and choose what they want to do. And if they pick and choose what they want to do and they're wanting to do that, let them do that, because that's going to bring them that joy that they need. And I just want to kind of touch on HBCUs. Dr. Schuler, Dr. Davis, you're at HBCU in particular. Some of us have been either mentored by individuals from HBCUs like Dr. Spencer. And so I just want you all to really quickly touch on HBCUs in the last 3 minutes. I know we spent a lot of time talking about really what diversity, equity, inclusion is. I thought it was important, but could you just talk about why HBCUs are so important and why maybe there needs to be more focus on that?
Sure. So go ahead.
It doesn't matter. Anybody, go ahead. It's fine.
Why are they important? Because of the establishment, what they was built on, the foundation that HBCUs were built on. It was a chance to give African Americans an education in higher ed. And that was not, again, going back to my earlier statement about our Constitution and how we're just 1/5 of a person, we still needed to be educated, and the founders of the HBCUs, the different ones across this land, decided to come together and build universities so that they could provide the education to those students. I am now at an HBCU, and because of Mr. Atkinson and his family, we are now able to produce some of the best STEM students. And you're looking at one, AJ, and there are many others who are, as he says, they're killing this game in STEMs. They never let the challenges that they encountered because of the color of their skins or because of the lack of funding. I have learned that being here at this HBCU, some of our leaders, they are creative. They know how to get funds from this area when they were turned down. But I noticed one thing: when we work collectively, we can bring in a lot of funding, and it should not have to be such a struggle to get funding from a federal school, which is built on federal principles and state principles and policies, but they fight to hold funding from us. And so I believe HBCUs are important because it does give so many students an opportunity to gain a higher ed education, to go out and make a change. And it also helped those who thought or have been told throughout their whole public school life that they would never be, they can never do, they would never make it. But they come to an HBCU and they find out there are so many possibilities, and they can do it, they can make it, and they will make it. And I believe that the future of the HBCUs is demonstrating that we are survivors. We are not surviving. We are winning the game. Whether they want to acknowledge it or not, we have to do it ourselves sometimes. We may call it tooting your horn. No, it's just not only tooting my horn, but I'm going to toot this person's horn and that person's horn, and so forth and so forth. So it's all about giving credit to where credit is due, giving honor to where honor is due, uplifting each other, encouraging each other, and keep opening the doors for the next generation.
Yeah, I echo that, Dr. Schuler, and I feel that HBCUs have a very prominent presence in higher education. And I think a lot of the focus of HBCUs is built more so on community and uplifting those from our community so that we can have a chance at being excellent, at having the American dream of improving ourselves as individuals and improving our society as well. And I think without HBCUs, the whole landscape of higher education would not be what it is now. And I think a lot of that attests to the environments that HBCUs provide that are not necessarily present at primarily white institutions. I feel that those environments are what actually get a lot of our diverse students to be retained in these fields, to graduate, and to fill in the ranks of professionals in higher ed. They may be small in terms of numbers, but our presence is there. And I feel that that definitely gets or should become the credit to these HBCUs that, you know, a lot of them are struggling now to remain open, but their purpose is still there and will always be valued.
And one thing I think is very fascinating is that everyone tries to concentrate their efforts on HBCUs, but are not actually, you know, recommended for actually high rankings. I think that Spelman or Morehouse, you know, maybe I shouldn't say, but, you know, also Meharry, you know, can compete with any institution. And, you know, it's just sad because we don't focus on it, and we don't actually build up the excellence. We only focus on the fact that we need a person of color that fits our criteria, things like that, and just moves on. We take the indirect cost away from that institution. And so that doesn't allow for the institution's infrastructure to actually grow. And so that is the disservice. When you're partnering with the HBCU, it has to be authentic. And that is the same thing when you're partnering with someone that's, on a panel. NMRN is very authentic. Let me tell you, they, I'm not saying that just because we're, on the call, but they actually check with you. They ask, is this appropriate to ask? We went over the questions. It's just a little intentional things. And then checking up on you, saying, are you okay? And if you need to replace somebody, do you have somebody in mind? There's so much intentionality. Just the small things are really what matters. So the attention to detail when you're doing business with the historically Black college is important. And remember, historically Black colleges have produced some of the finest individuals across the country. And we have to be aware of that. Maybe the next Black, Nobel laureate will come from an HBCU. And we also have to be aware that we have to embrace Black scientists as excellence. 2 examples, I'll beat a broken record dead, but let me tell you, Dale Abel is a good example of what high impact research looks like. He has an H index of 90, it's 92, I think now. And a young investigator that has that same level is Christopher Barnes, who's at Stanford. And these are what you should model what Black excellence looks like. Stop limiting what, individuals can do, because all individuals of color have that same access if you give them the same resources and the intentional mentoring that they need to be successful. Don't ever try to think that just because a person is Black, you can limit what they will do. You have to be aware that each individual person is a person that is able to transform who they are with the right skill set. And so I want you all just to be aware that, as we close and we'll take questions, that HBCUs are the livelihood and why so many Black scientists are around. And we're all trained at HBCUs, or we come in contact with individuals that are trained by HBCUs and then train us or mentor us. And so we have to be really aware about how to nourish those relationships and make sure that HBCUs last and actually give them the proper funding to be successful. Because a lot of times they're lacking because there's no good ranking and there's not a good impression of what an HBCU is at the infrastructure of the NIH. So if you're adding all these programs, you really can't give the NIH and NSF, other funding sources. If you're giving these opportunities, you have to make it equitable so that there's actually grading scales that fit what's the infrastructure at an HBCU. And that means R1 still, not R15 or a score grant. It means R1. So there's equal access to be able to do the same type of research. And we have to be aware. And there's so much that could be done. We'll probably do another follow-up panel and around Juneteenth to really talk about this in more detail. But does anyone have any questions? I see that there was a question and a comment about Black History Month being the shortest month. Could someone, kind of touch about that, just in general, why that might be?
Well, I think it all began back when the history at Kent University. I think it was just a month that was chosen or given to them because I wasn't at the table of conversation. That I think it was during the time President General Ford who started recognizing it after the showdown with at Kent University. And I think that's in Ohio University, I think, somewhere in that way. But I don't know why the shortest month was chosen. But it also speaks to the racism in this country. And that is my best answer.
I would agree. And then also be aware that other Black people are celebrated across the world in October. So there is a Black History Month for Europe that actually does 31 days. So that's something that the US could learn. But I also think that we have to institutionalize Black holidays. I think Kwanzaa should be recognized, whether we celebrate it or not, give the opportunity to celebrate that as a holiday. And then also, of course, Juneteenth should be a national holiday, but it shouldn't stop there. That should just be the beginning to recognize that some of the leaders that we know are the leaders that have instituted around, making that big change event that we know should be celebrated as well. So just not only Martin Luther King's birthday should be the only Black birthday that we celebrate. I know he's the youngest Nobel Prize laureate, that's Black, but there's other Nobel Prize laureates, for example. And there's a lot of things that are ingrained in racism, but also at the same time ingrained in not wanting to change, because the change really comes with equal access. And so that is really where Black History Month really begins, is really when you have equal access. That is the thing I think everyone is really scared of, is what happens when Black people have equal access to every opportunity. You know, the reason that I think that the infrastructure of making it hard to get access is so that there's not equitable things, because Black excellence, you know, really is highly achievable. I think that the talented 10, you know, in my opinion, is much more than the talented 10. It's just access. You know, everyone can be intelligent. And so that is something that we have to really learn to embrace and celebrate. And just remember that Black history is just not in February, it's every day. Black history is every day. So don't ever think that just because someone's not celebrating it, remember that Black person in the hall, when they throw their head up and when they see you or they do that head nod, they know they're celebrating you and you're being excellent. So just remember that as well. Are there any other questions before we kind of go? And yes, I'll always shout out my mentor, Dr. Abel. And I say that because I see what I can become. And then I said Christopher Barnes because he's an example of who has done it as a young investigator and where I want to go. So remember also, the beautiful thing about Black excellence is that we can see someone that's better. We can see someone where someone's already achieved what we want, and we go out, we ask how to get there, and we love to help one another. But I think we're pretty much done because no one has any other questions. Oh, there's one last question. Do you have advice when the Board of Regents for a group of institutions do not recognize Juneteenth as a federal holiday for its employees, despite the presidential order that it is? That depends on, you know, the Board of Regents is the highest the highest in the game. You know, so that even, you know, the chancellor has to even, you know, yield to the Board of Regents. And so one thing is that the only thing I can say is that having equal access to maybe other billionaires or multimillionaires that could sit on a board, you know, that is where you're going to actually be able to have a cultural change, when there's other funding sources that can sit on a Board of Regents and can advise. So I think it's just about the institution diversifying where their funds come from. There are some very phenomenal, rich African Americans that could actually be on a board of other people of color, to be able to diversify that. And I think the best thing is that, you know, you have to kind of just celebrate while you can. Maybe you may not get it off, but you can celebrate where you're at in your department or your particular center. And you can celebrate it in your laboratory if you're doing research in the traditional what way we think. So it's just one step at a time, being the change for yourself and letting that affect each individual. And I think eventually they'll come around. So I think that's it, everybody. We really appreciate you, you know, staying with us and talking. If you have any other questions, please just let us know. We're happy to, you know, have a corresponding via email later on.
Awesome. Yes, I just want to thank our panelists for participating in this webinar. This panel is beautiful, and we just appreciate everybody for joining us today. This was a much needed discussion, and we look forward to hosting one last Black History Month webinar next Thursday. We'll be discussing allyship for Black scientists, so please join us for that. It's going to be a great one, as always. And just to answer in the chat, this recording will be shared. We'll be sending out next week to the email you registered with, and we'll also be on our YouTube channel as well. So be on the lookout for that. But thank you all for attending, and we hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.